Hello, everyone. Welcome to the podcast Diversity with Dale, where we discuss diversity in workplaces. I am your host, Pallavi Jha, Chairperson and Managing Director of Dale Carnegie India. Today on the show, we have Yeshasvini Ramaswamy, who is a serial entrepreneur and currently the CEO of Great Places to Work India. She is, of course, a very well-known woman achiever. She has been awarded and rewarded and recognized for her various achievements. She's an amazing expert on workplace cultures and analytics. She has introduced India's first, or is it the world's first, AI-based platform for culture measurement. She is an extremely innovative individual and a thought leader and a speaker. So it's a pleasure to have you with us, Yeshasvini. In this episode, we are going to talk about generational diversity with Yeshasvini. As we all know, multi-generational diversity is a norm today. It's a great phenomenon because it helps teams to become more productive, more innovative, more agile, more dynamic. But we also must recognize that there is a very serious generation gap. It's always been time immemorial. Any generation you ask, there will be a generation gap. So how do workplaces today, when nearly 5 generations work together, really gel and really make the most of that diversity, or do they not? That's what we're going to discuss and explore with Yeshasvini today. So welcome to Diversity with Dale, Yeshasvini, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Pallavi. You've been very kind with your introduction, and I think this will become a mutual admiration society if I end up talking about you. But I'm such a pleasure to be here, and such a needed topic for us to discuss, deliberate, and all of us are looking at solutions. So very happy to spend this time with you.
Absolutely. And as the CEO of Great Places to Work India, where you've worked with thousands of companies, you have a vantage point view really of organization cultures. And we know that managements and HR teams are driving diversity and inclusive cultures throughout. I mean, that's really something that's on minds of organizations today. And so with all that energy that's going in, we also in Dale Carnegie decided to do a bit of a survey. So about 3-4 months ago, we completed a survey with 80 companies around India. And we discovered that one of the most strongly associated aspects of diversity is with women. But the second most strong association with diversity is age-related diversity. And that was very interesting for us because, India is at the end of the day, 65% of the population is young, the workforce is getting younger, and we all know that each one has its own differences. In your experience, what have you found about diversity, age diversity in organizations, and do you see that as a priority in companies?
Yeah, I think quite a few myths that I'm going to bust, okay? And the trends that we're seeing is absolutely fascinating, Pallavi. I think pre-pandemic, there was a lot of research and thesis around organizations becoming younger. In fact, we've seen in our data organizations, the average age of the organization reducing by as much as 5 years, in a year-on-year data. However, in the post-pandemic scenario, what is interesting to note is that organizations are not becoming younger.
Interesting.
So I think the generational diversity dialogue is going to assume more importance. And there are a couple of nudges towards this correction, if I may call it, of organizations becoming younger year on year. I think the biggest change has been the pandemic. The pandemic came, and with it came the virtual work environment. And with the virtual work environment came talent pools that were originally not accessible that organizations could tap into. And similarly, from a talent standpoint, the talent was today no longer limited to go to the nearest office, for example, to work. So I think in the last 2 years, there's been so much of a churn that we're actually not seeing organizations becoming younger. And secondly, I think the traditional models of hiring are changing. So if you look at, and like you rightly pointed out, with the 1,000 odd organizations that we work every year, we're actually seeing a lot of future orientation on hiring policies. And a lot of companies are coming forward to publish something called a gig economy workplace policy, right? So what used to be a hiring plan, which used to have a majority of full-time employees and a portion of it as part-time or associates, is now quickly changing to lesser portion of full-time employees in traditional models of hiring, but a very engaged gig workforce. And what a gig workforce brings to the table is agility and innovation, right? Because we are now having models of talent where I'm able to hire the right talent at the right cost, at the right time. So the models of hiring is changing, the hybrid work environment is changing. So I think both the challenges that an intergenerational workforce comes to the organization, along with the opportunities that it has, I think has to have us as people leaders really go back to the drawing board and start over on a lot of things. Yeah.
That's fascinating. And I think I didn't even expect you to receive this age data, the statistic that the age is actually growing. Because in India, for particularly, we've been talking about a younger workforce all the time, and we've seen millennials actually getting into leadership positions and Gen Z actually now becoming the biggest part of the workforce. So this was quite a revelation. But that's very interesting. If we're seeing that the age gap, average age is increasing, it means that the older workforce, which was used to going to office, which was used to maybe a hierarchical style of working, was used to meeting their team members, are now challenged with possibly this whole virtual hybrid environment, and to top it all with gig, right? Working with just people who are not really your employees, but just a team member for a short period of time. And therefore, they really usually, they find it difficult to do this remotely. At least in our experience, when we talk to our clients, we find that dealing with older generation people managers who are not used to this style is a challenge. So how much of this you think is overcome already because of the pandemic? Because everybody was forced to change. And how much of it is still a real problem? And how do youngsters then deal with bosses who can't get it right?
Yeah. Oh, wow. I always like having this conversation with you. They're just thought-provoking questions. So let me take one question at a time, right? How is the age having an impact on just the workplace culture, right? So when we take a look at it from a perspective or a lens of diversity and inclusion, I think the single most metric that is becoming important for organizations to measure is a sense of belongingness. So what used to be D&I and then got changed to DEI is now DEI and B, and with B becoming the single most factor. And we're seeing a very interesting correlation between what we call as the Gen Z generation and driving a sense of belongingness. Because for them, coming to office, building into personal skills, a home away from home, these were very important factors. Whereas if you look at the younger generation, the generation which are in their mid-20s, they necessarily don't look at having a best friend in the office, right? But for them, it is ease of work, the systems, the processes, availability of technology. They are mostly looking at joining organizations which have a huge sense of purpose and social impact. So I
Right.
think the very purpose of how a generation was responding to a workplace culture, I think that is changing. And
Right.
look, I think from a way forward standpoint, I think we are urging our people leaders to go ahead and invest in something called intentional collaboration. Because the hybrid work environment is here to stay. That is not
Yeah.
going to go away. So pre-pandemic was physical, pandemic was all virtual, right? And then there are dialogues saying, will companies call employees back to work? There are some companies announcing that we're permanently virtual. However, what is here to stay is hybrid. And what the hybrid environment does from an inclusion standpoint is that it can very easily seep in stereotype and biases. And we're still at the very early stage of it, but actually we're tracking and asking our community to report on something as simple as an appraisal and whether we're seeing biases steep in. And we have seen a variance, interestingly, of employees who are coming to a physical office, spending time with their managers and supervisors, building those work conversations, vis-a-vis the same manager managing a team completely virtually. So in a hybrid system, from a people manager standpoint, if some of my members, I meet them in office and some of them I don't, but I just deal with them virtually, it is going to give rise to biases. And how do we draw a framework where we urge our employees to intentionally collaborate? That is going to be a dialogue worth having, because a lot of it can go wrong and we don't have solutions to everything as yet.
Yeah, I think everything is still in the process of adjustment, I would say, and therefore discovery. Right now, it's really the end of best practices because we have to come up with new practices. That said, I'm just thinking, you talked about appraisals, and that got me thinking about the fact that, looking at the fact that talent is available everywhere and anywhere right now and at any time. So actually, I make it sound so easy because actually recruiting is hugely difficult despite all of that. But still, I mean, your options have widened as a recruiter. And, if we find today that you have somebody, either a millennial who's a decision maker as a recruiter, what kind of biases would they have to be mindful of if they come across a Gen Z candidate or a Boomer candidate? What would they have to do, or a Gen X candidate? What would they have to do to be mindful of? Because one thing we know, just creating a workforce is not good enough, right? You can even decide that I'm going to just hire for generational diversity, but it's about getting them to work together. That's the key. So at Dale Carnegie, we always say that diversity is the outcome. It's the inclusive cultures that will get you there. Yes. So how do you build that inclusive culture? You talked about bias. So how do you overcome the bias and the stereotyping that we have in our heads?
Right. I think we need to begin by first acknowledging it. I think a lot of organizations still shy away, and a standard template is not the answer for it. And I think there are a number of new practices that are coming in where a profile, for example, is today shared without the name, without any indication of who this person is, right? So you have anonymous profiles floating around. You have a psychometric testing, superseding interviews, personal interviews. So I think on the hiring front, on the recruitment front, there is already a lot of new practices that are emerging to deal with bias. Specifically, the intergenerational bias, I think a whole lot of it has to do with the concept of organization frameworks and structures. I think the older generation were far more comfortable with the hierarchical structure. They're far more comfortable with the chain of command, so as to say. But the younger workforce, they love to sit and talk and deliberate and challenge. And so I think the work styles are different. The importance of a job itself has changed, because I think the economic security that the older generations brought in has made the need to have a full-time job a lot more lesser in the younger generation. So they're going to pick up a job, or they're going to choose to work with you only if if they like what you stand for, if they can identify with your purpose, if they feel your organization is on to doing something global and something large. And that we're seeing in millennials very clearly. Whereas for the previous generations, even if they didn't like a lot of stuff, the economic need was so high that they would like really put up to a few things. On the appraisal side of it, I think we're seeing a lot of technology coming in to manage performance and expectations. And my advice would be for more and more organizations to adopt to real-time technologies, because technology gives you scale. But when you finish a project, you have a debate, you have a discussion, you have a feed-forward process, and you end it. So the concept of a year-end appraisal or a biannual appraisal, those are the ones that you have to do away with, and urgently. And the machines can average up the performance of your year and feed that forward to your comp and then this thing. The more you're going to call out and make it an instance-based rather than a real-time flow, I think you're going to be giving opportunities for more and more biases.
Interesting, very interesting. And, we understand that every generation, like you rightly mentioned, has their own different, they have their own unique experiences, and therefore they've developed that, the value systems of the age that they grew up in, or the environment that they grew up in, and the viewpoints, with the different worldviews. It can be excellent in terms of bringing together, a very diverse, a very versatile, and a very innovative, team in a sense together. But it can also lead to communication issues. That's been the most common challenge, is that there are so many barriers in just understanding each other. It's just simple. The very fact that maybe the new generation, the millennials may be very happy to talk in acronyms with emoticons. Maybe, Gen X and Boomers are not so comfortable with that because they grew up in a more formal environment. Social is so much part of the life of millennials, but it's not so much the part of Gen Z in a sense.
Right.
So it's very interesting how different times of lives have have shaped the different generations' worldviews.
Sure.
How can organizations actually tap that difference in a positive way? Do you have any insights on how organizations are doing it?
Yeah, I could probably share what is it that we're experiencing in our own organization and what is it that we're experiencing with our clients. I think you've really, that's the heart of the conversation when you're talking about diversity, inclusion, belongingness. Like the language, what is the language that we adopt to communicate? Because, different generations understand the same message very differently. I think a couple of things for us to make sense of it is one, the alpha generation, Pallavi, which is the one that is coming into the workforce
Right.
very shortly. Interestingly, they don't even communicate. Their language is just emojis.
Yes.
And they don't. And for them, the biggest need is or the thing that scares them the most is talking to another human being. And
Yes.
this is happening in our lifestyle. So sometimes it feels very surreal that we are actually preparing to welcome a generation into our workforce that doesn't use words to communicate. They use emojis. And we have
Yes.
school curriculum right now where a lot of students are being encouraged to draw their feelings and not necessarily write. So I think communication itself is being dealt differently. And then you have acronyms and dialogue. I think we have a lot of generation who are very sensitive to gender, for example, right? So do
Yes.
you identify? What do you identify as? And are you fluid? Are you a she or a her or a So I think those aspects, especially around the inclusion, again becomes important. And then you have work information, which is there is a generation which is very comfortable with numbers, with data, with analysis, whereas the younger generation is a lot more comfortable with passion, with emotion. So I think it is a multi-layer, multi-solution approach that we need to be taking in. And while I talk about multi-solution, I think gone are the days of a newsletter, gone are the days where we thought that one mode of communication.
Yeah.
What was it? I think today there has to be a huge mix of digital, and in digital content and gamification. There has to be a whole lot of personal communication and personal connect as a way through. And of course, you have your written communication per se. So I think one to many, as in a
Yeah.
town hall or those constructs were typical of any organization communication construct. And now one to many is slowly giving way to many. And that is the workplace communication that is getting built. And if you bring in the concept of equity in this whole thing, there is a surge of our clients who are now investing heavily into inclusive technologies because they are hiring from sections which have been disadvantaged. So there is a spike in technology investments which are inclusive in nature from a listening standpoint, from a communicating standpoint. So this is an area which is, I think, rapidly evolving as we speak, and it'll be very interesting to see how it turns
Yeah,
out.
to see where and how we finally, it's like it's a changing world, and we got to create a new world, and that's true. But
It's
communication
scary
is
also
really the sorry.
sometimes. It's scary also sometimes. We'll see.
Well, I guess yeah, I guess it's scary, but I guess we just have to face it. We have no choice at the moment. We are all caught up in a very dynamic situation. Very interesting. So there are two aspects really, I think, where the barriers really come up. One is communication. We talked a lot about it. It's just not a one-way communication anymore. It's not one mode communication anymore. We really have to have lots of types of communications, visual,
Yeah.
graphic, all of that thrown in. But also the differing expectations, right? Because if I'm a manager and I'm expecting to work with, say, Gen Z, who's driven by, ruling their own lives and, looking for that higher purpose, whereas the Gen X boss really didn't bother to ask his boss why he's doing something, right? So he's now not able to give that big picture to that Gen Z team member.
Yeah.
So these are the expectations that kind of become barriers between team members, because whether they're manager and reportee, whatever they could be colleagues, they could be peers. There's just different expectations, and it boils down to possibly maybe creating greater awareness, greater understanding of each other, opening up minds, honestly.
Yeah, and
And
new practices, Pallavi. So a couple of things that we're seeing a lot of companies adopt is, your AMA sessions, which is Ask Me Anything kind of
yes,
sessions where there is no agenda and, you can communicate and, you can feel free to speak up, and reverse mentoring, where
Yes.
because the average age of our organizations is not coming down. So,
Yes.
so how is it like as a senior person by age, how is he or she or they, how are they going to accept a person younger than them to be reporting into in a world where there is new technology that can be overwhelming to that generation? So
Yes.
I think constructs around reverse mentoring.
So I'm glad you made the point on reverse mentoring, because we have been traditionally talking about the fact that it's the more experienced who will mentor the younger and the less experienced. But when it comes to social media, digital technology, etc., you see the younger actually mentoring
Yeah.
the old, and they're almost exasperated, saying, "Have you tried doing this?" I can see the expression on my daughter's face when she's telling me that. But I can tell you that reverse mentoring is becoming very much acceptable, and therefore the older generation has to feel a little bit more open-minded, less
Yeah.
put their egos aside and learn, because that's all that we have to do today. Similarly, the young generation, while they're very purpose-driven, worldly wise, have a view on everything, are looking for. They want their empowerment, they want their space. But one of the things that we found in a research that was done globally by Dale Carnegie a few years ago, actually, was that they equally look for mentoring. They want growth. They value growth a lot. And part of that growth comes from being able to get that mentoring from experienced people. So mentoring both sides is possibly a very important aspect of bridging the gap between
I
expectations.
think it's got to do with functional expertise.
Yeah.
So, and that's where, look, I think life is the biggest teacher, right? So, while we talk about new age technologies, life is life.
Yeah,
It
absolutely.
brings in a certain kind of maturity to every dialogue, and I think that will never go away.
Right.
So, just how we channel that to the
That's
next generation.
fascinating. So, we discussed a lot. I mean, obviously, the big revelation is that organizations are average age isn't going down, it's actually going up. And there are
It's
multi-generational workforces.
stagnating to going up depending on the sectors, Pallavi. So, for
Okay.
example, manufacturing, the traditional jobs are no longer available because there's such a
Yeah.
huge impetus to green technology, carbon neutral, that the jobs that are getting created are in the ICT arena. And those kind of jobs are the younger generation, right?
Correct.
Whereas if you look at the banking, whether you look at high touch models of business, then you're having, a reverse hiring process where they're actually preferring an older generation because they bring in stability, loyalty. It's a different culture
Yes.
that generation brings in. And
Fascinating.
all organizations and businesses are so globally networked today
Yes.
that cultures are becoming a melting pot in themselves.
Right.
So we will not see linear trends in demographics that we saw during the pre-pandemic times. For sure.
Interesting, very interesting. And when we talk about globally integrated workforces, we also must recognize that the average demographic age of a country changes, right? So you might have
Yes.
the oldest in China and US, whereas we have young people in India. So when we
Yeah.
work with each other internationally, there again the age differences come in,
Very
of course,
true.
complicated by the cultural competencies that are required. But that's fascinating. So you have age dynamics in terms of the average age dynamics. You have challenges in communication to overcome, challenges in expectations to overcome, overcoming biases, whether it's at recruitment time or appraisal time,
Very
emerging openness to mentoring both ways. There are so many things that are getting impacted when we think more deeply about how to make teams that have got multiple generations working together, making them more productive. So this has been a fascinating conversation, Yeshasvini. And so with that, we come to the end of this episode. And thank you for joining us and sharing your insights on multi-generational diversity. And I hope our listeners enjoyed the show. It was great having you with us. And
No,
thank
thank
you
you,
all for
Pallavi.
listening to Diversity of Dale. And don't forget to share it with your friends. Until then, this is your host, Pallavi Jha, signing off.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you, Pallavi, for having me over. And I think I must congratulate Dale for taking up these important issues. They're definitely the need of the hour. And thank you also for doing what you do.
Thank you. And, there's just amazing work that happens when you build the right workplace cultures and all the innovation that you keep doing. So more power to you.